What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to have a little bit of conversation about how my reading of the Bible as a young person impacted my views on measurement. All right. Before we jump into it, you already know the routine. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the alert notification bell. Consider joining our community, whether on YouTube or Patreon. Consider volunteering in that community as well, because hey, we need the help. We also have some really cool merchandise out there, so check some of that out, and check out the links in our descriptions for other ways to support the channel. All right, so let's jump into this. When I was a young whippersnapper, many of you know that I've been reading the Bible ever since I was a young lad. Remember coming across reading a story about King David in First Chronicles. I think it was chapter 21. And in this story, David gets this idea to count the fighting men of Israel. He wants to, in effect, take a census of how many people are available at his disposal. When he presents this idea, one of his men, counselors, whatever, I believe it was Joab, he says something along the lines that, why would you do this? You know, all of these people belong to you anyway, and this is offensive to God. Why are you doing this? You know, may the Lord multiply our troops over, 100 times over, which I don't even know what that means. And so I'd really want to ask a Jewish scholar, a Hebraic scholar, like, what does that term actually mean there? But anyway, that's not the point of this dialogue. We'll get there in Bible study with the next pastor. But the guy says, this is insulting to God. You shouldn't do this. And David says, no, we're going to do it anyway. And so the guy goes out and does the counting. And it's like over 1 million people, which does seem like an exaggeration, especially when you consider that the guy's like, yeah, he left out Levi and Benjamin because this order was so repulsive to him. This was offensive. And sure enough, after he does carry out this assignment, God is offended and is upset and punishes David. God literally in this story punishes David for counting the people. And in this sense, for me, the inference was that counting the people was correlated with his own pride. Now, there's two things there. The first thing is that I had this idea, based off of my culturally religious upbringing, that pride was sinful. That which is weird. You believe, when you believe that pride is sinful, is it so hard to imagine that the people who believe that are going to struggle with self-esteem? You know, which I did. But so the inference was that counting people was correlated with his pride. Therefore, measuring progress for me became correlated with pride. And I know there are quite a few preachers, especially in the urban church, who actually preach against against measuring. Not to this degree, but it's always like, what is it, like measure? It's like measurement is the thief of joy or something like that. All different types of things, and it's just like, but I want you to imagine trying to manage your life without measuring your life's activity, which is exactly what I was doing, because I felt that the way that I kind of rationalized this thing was that the reason why this is prideful is because you're thinking that you're doing this, and you're not understanding that it's the Lord is doing this. And ultimately, it's even more than prideful. It's you not trusting the Lord, because you should be walking by faith, not by sight. And if you're trying to count these things, you're trying to see what's going on. And in the words of a lot of black pastors, why are you trying to figure it out when God has already worked it out? The idea of measuring progress, of counting where I was, of even knowing what's in my bank account, almost became, for me. And again, as I share with on all of these, I'm sharing my story. I'm not saying every believer struggled with this. I'm saying this was a struggle for me for whatever reason. um and yeah, so I'm not really, I wasn't really measuring my life. I felt that was wrong. I felt that was offensive to God. I felt that meant that I wasn't trusting God with my life. And I didn't really realize how large of a root that this had taken until a mentor asked me when I was in a financially like hard place, which was the majority of my life. A mentor asked me how much would it take for me to survive a year, and I honestly didn't know the math, and I was like, oh, no, I don't know the math. Now there's another story that I can tell here because that mentor was definitely a jackass about this situation, and so I'll come back and talk about that later. But that was a learning moment for me because I'm like, oh yeah, dude, you should probably know how much it kind of takes for you to live, yearly. Like your what are your bills, and then not just your bills, like you got groceries and stuff, and then like which I do write about this in a book that I have. I haven't released this book yet called Making the Jump. And it's called, just kind of like knowing your number and writing your number down. And I started realizing, like, oh, yeah, because also in that you have to kind of define what living is for you. So I'm like, oh man, because then I really realized, like, not only do I not know how much I would need to make it for the rest of the year, like if somebody would come up to me and say, hey, I'm gonna write you a check, which is essentially what he was claiming to do. I'm gonna write you a check for the rest of the year if you can tell me how much you need for the rest of the year. I'll write the check right now, just how much you need to survive. Um, you know, but I realized, not only it's beyond that. It's not just knowing that. I also realized like I didn't even know what living was for me because I this took me on such a journey that I realized that I'd just really been surviving and not even realizing that I was surviving because I had totally separated myself from that concept. In my mind, I wasn't surviving. I was walking by faith. I was living by faith. I was trusting God. I was like Paul. I was an ambassador in chains and then, but after he asked me this question, and I'm like, huh, it really led me on this journey to figure out how I had grown so detached from the details of my own life. And I was able to trace it back to, wow, reading that when I was a child, it really took hold of like, no, don't measure these things. Don't pay attention to those things. You just trust the Lord. You keep one foot right in front of the other. And then those things are kind of reinforced even in the New Testament when you read the story of Peter walking on water. And Peter is doing great when he's walking on water until he starts paying attention to the details. When he starts looking at the waves, when he starts looking at the wind, all of a sudden that becomes a sign of doubt. If you're looking at these details, if you're paying attention to these things, you're now doubting, and now you're no longer going to be walking on the water, you're going to be drowning. Well, see, I was never walking on the water. I was drowning the whole way through. It wasn't until I started paying attention to the details that I realized that I didn't need God to work it out because I actually could figure it out. And I realized that I'd been robbing myself, for 20 plus years by that time of actually living my life and actually, well, yeah, living my life. Um, since then, things have been drastically better. Could they be even better? Yep. I think that is kind of this. I think that's the one static thing about life is that things can always be better. I cannot yet imagine a time where things couldn't be better, and I've not seen that yet. But drastically improved. I literally, I'm almost unrecognizable from who I used to be back then. Um, and it's so funny to me now when I think about it because there were a string of decisions that I made and a string of commitments that I put in place to protect the purity of my motives and my service towards God. And by doing that, I actually deprived myself of a healthy life. And now I realize that I don't need Jesus to take the wheel. I actually don't need God's advice at all because he's not good at giving advice because he doesn't talk. And so none of this is God's advice anyway. It's some old guy in a desert or old groups of guys, who wrote things, So yeah, now it I feel so much better in life, and it's just that was just an odd thing. I know it's a small thing, but that was an odd thing for me, just realizing like, wow, it took me so long to kind of break that little small spell. But again, when people talk about how helpful the Bible is, I don't think they're looking at these things under a microscope, because I am not the only one who have read this book with a great heart and with great intentions, and have absolutely pulled some self-destructive ideologies from it. So just wanted to share that. I hope it was something of value for you out there. I thank you all for supporting the channel. I'll be dropping a few more videos today. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider joining our community, whether on YouTube or Patreon, and consider volunteering. We need it. Check out the merch, and hey, comment on the video before, tell me what you think, and make sure comment on the video below, tell me what you think, and make sure to share this with somebody that you think this might help a little bit. All right, until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. I'll holla.